This season of Trucksafe Live is presented by Log Rock. LogRock builds technology tools to help trucking companies stay compliant with federal and state regulations. LogRock is easier. We connect to multiple systems like your FMCSA account and ELD, so you only have to use one system. LogRock is faster. We automate tedious tasks so you can use your time more effectively. LogRock is smarter. We notify you of issues like expiring or missing documents before they happen, so you can be proactive rather than reactive. Setup is easy, and most of our customers are online shortly after signing up. Request a demo now at logrock.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 21 of Trucksafe Live, a show where we and our guests tackle the hot button issues impacting highway transportation. I'm Brandon with Trucksafe and Childress Law, both of which are dedicated to helping motor carriers develop and maintain cutting edge safety programs. And this is Brian Runnels, VP. Brian. That should be fine. We'll be fine. Brian Runnels, VP of Safety from Reliance Partners. Good friend. Finally got you here in studio with me.
It's a great studio.
Otherwise known as the loft above
my
garage.
The loft of the garage. Yeah, it's a beautiful studio. It's good stuff, man.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
I'm glad we have the budget big enough to fly you in here and...
anytime you need me, I'll hop on a plane and be here in no time.
Brian lives like 20 minutes away from me, so no, we don't have any kind of budget for this. Glad he's here with me. We're talking today about fleet maintenance. I want to hit on a couple of topics in light of some things going on in the industry, including International Road Check, which is coming up, couple weeks from now. So we're going to hit on that, and then also some recent cases that we're seeing in the industry where maintenance is a main focus of them. So thought this would be a good time to really focus in on that, because Brian, you and I have both seen how maintenance problems can cause a lot of problems in a lot of different contexts. So
yeah, and it's coming to the surface, so it could be definitely used against a company where it wasn't used before.
Yeah, for sure. So good time to do it. Before we get to the topic of today, a few things going on at Trucksafe that are worth mentioning and in the industry. We just wrapped up our fleet compliance boot camp. Had a great time in Indianapolis. Brian was there with us. He spoke at the event. I think we had around 30 people or so. Got a lot of great feedback about that. We spent 2 days really diving in deep to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations and related state regulations, walking through everything, not everything, but most of the stuff that fleets need to know to remain compliant with the multitude of safety regulations that they're expected to comply with in that green book there. So it was a great time. If you missed us for this particular boot camp, we're going to try and do them twice a year. I think our next one will probably be in the fall, probably in Orlando. So be sure to follow us on trucksafebootcamp.com. We will post there when we decide where our next one is going to be. Brian, you going to make it down there if we do it in Orlando?
I can probably figure out a way to get to Orlando.
Okay, I may have to pay for your flight for that one. So I'm going to have to pay for my flight. Start saving up for that. Let's see. I think I got a picture from our boot camp this year. Look at that. There you are.
Yeah, the back of my head.
Back of your head looks good. Yeah. You look good from that angle.
Jeremy,
he
share the same view from the back.
So anyway, great time. Thanks for everybody who came and joined us for that. What else we got going on? Trucksafe Network. This is something I always like to mention that we've always got going on in the background. Our Trucksafe Compliance Network is free to join. There's an app available in the App Store and also the Google Play Store. If you're interested in following along with our DOT compliance related content, our YouTube videos, our free webinars, and then also the network is meant as a forum for safety professionals to get in there, ask questions, share things with others, all to help help make our fleets more compliant and make our roads safer. So find that online at trucksafenetwork.com, or again, like I said, in the App Store or the Google Play Store. Last thing to mention about Trucksafe is our courses. If you're not familiar with our courses, we offer a bunch of DOT-related courses, online courses, available at trucksafeacademy.com. We have a course dedicated to safety managers, anybody in a position of kind of managing a regulated fleet and having to work through those regulations that we talked about. We also have courses for drivers, and we have hazmat courses and reasonable suspicion courses. So if you're interested in those, like I said, they're online through our learning management system. It tracks progress, gives you a completion certificate. So check that out, trucksafeacademy.com. All right, enough about us. What's going on in the industry, Brian? Anything interesting from your perspective going on? I think
before we get into the road check and the some of the maintenance issues we were going to talk about, the crash preventability program, the changes that are going to be coming there, if they go through, it's going to be a great thing. The only thing that I wish they'd do, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of people, is they'd make it retroactive to a certain point. As of right now, there's no retroactivity to it. But I wish they would take it back.
I agree. It's so... kind of stepping back, the crash preventability demonstration program, if you're not familiar with it, is the program where motor carriers can go in and challenge, or drivers challenge, the preventability of the accidents in which they're involved. And if they are successful in that appeal, then the accidents do not weigh on their CSA scores, or if you're the driver, your PSP account, the way that they would otherwise. So it's a good program. The problem is it is so limited in scope. There are only certain accident types. I think there are 16 accident types that are eligible for consideration in the program. FMCSA's recent news that Brian mentioned is that they are looking to expand that program. They have, I think, increased it to like 21.
Yeah, 21 or 22, and I think we can still throw out that rare and unusual. I mean, you got to have somebody jumping out of an airplane and hit your truck to count on that one.
We talked about that at the boot camp. It's just crazy to me that one of the 16 eligible crash types is literally a truck getting hit by a skydiver.
Or an airplane.
But like we said, it had to have happened at some time or at some point, or else that would not have been an option.
Yeah, so. And the couple of them that I really like, I do like the loss control where it strikes a truck in the side. You hear so many of those, and we get asked all the time, hey, can I challenge that? You can, but you're not going to win it. So that one, and then the introduction of video.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that one's going to be huge.
What are they doing about the video? I didn't catch that.
If the video justifies that it wasn't the driver's fault.
That's right.
Then...
so even if it doesn't fit neatly into one of those categories, they're going to accept video evidence as kind of getting you past that barrier.
Right. Yeah. Whether it's, and you see these on social media all the time, whether someone comes over and brake checks a driver and the only thing it looks like is a rear end accident. Those are really, really hard to get rid of. And now the video can exonerate the driver. And with as much video as going on, cameras are 86% of the safety technologies that are in trucks. That's going to be a huge one.
Yeah, especially at least outward facing cameras. We're starting to see pretty widespread adoption of those at this point. There are still holdouts, obviously, as there are going to be, but definitely not as much so as with the driver facing cameras. So I agree. I think this news about the expansion of the crash preventability determination program is welcome news to most of us in the industry. I think it's what carriers and we have been petitioning for a long time now, so it was good to see that. Also of note is potential upcoming changes to the safety measurement system. We've talked about this in a prior show. We had an episode dedicated to what exactly is changing, but these are your CSA scores, and FMCSA put out a notice, it's probably been a couple of months ago now, saying that they are proposing certain changes to the way that CSA scores are calculated. It gets into the weeds very quickly when you start to look at what exactly is changing, but those changes have been spurred by the long longtime criticisms that we've heard and that we've made against CSA, including things like the subjectivity of the severity weights. So curious your thoughts, Brian, on kind of those changes that we're expecting to happen, probably not until the end of this year at the earliest, but nevertheless.
Yeah, the changes in the scoring where everything is pretty much worth the same amount unless it's out of service. I don't know if that's the exactly right way to do it. A 5 over counts the same as a 15 over. So I don't know if that's going to be right. I think that's going to put a big kink in the challenging of you get a citation with it, and even if you have the citation thrown out or they change it to that's the only way it's going to work, is if they throw it out.
Yeah.
If they change it to a different violation,
a lesser violation,
it's still worth 1 point.
It does you no good.
It does you no good. But on the flip side, if you do get one taken out, it's going to have a bigger effect,
a bigger impact. Yeah,
so
for sure.
that's the really good thing there. The other thing that when you get the out of service, those out of service points are automatically going towards the unsafe driving basic. Yeah. So, they've moved drug and alcohol, put it in there, and then anything that's out of service, that extra point goes to your unsafe basic.
That's right.
And then the other big one I think is probably what's going to lead us to where we're going to talk about maintenance is the split up of what is basically company owned for the that's going to be on the company as far as score, and what should have been observed by the driver during a pre-trip inspection.
I think this is an important change, and I think I think it will benefit a lot of motor carriers in the sense. So the idea is we've got our existing vehicle maintenance basic as one of our CSA scores. And what we know from FMCSA's notice is that is the one basic that has the most data in it. It is the one that has the most violations. And what they say in their notice of these changes is that because we have so much data in that particular basic, it becomes unwieldy. It's hard to draw any conclusions from what may be contributing to those violations. And so their idea is, let's split that out, as Brian said, into 2 different basics. We're going to have a standard vehicle maintenance basic, and then we're going to have a vehicle maintenance driver observed. And those driver observed maintenance violations are going to be ones that could have been or should have been discovered by a driver had they done a thorough inspection of the vehicle, whereas the normal vehicle maintenance category will encompass more latent defects, things that even if the driver did a thorough inspection, they may not have necessarily noticed. And I think it's good because then if I'm a company that has a high driver observed basic, then I know fundamentally that what I need to focus my attention on is making sure that the drivers are doing thorough inspections. Whereas if I have a high vehicle maintenance category, then the problem is less about the driver's activity and more about what I'm doing to maintain these trucks. So
I think we'll see, especially on the out of service side, whether it's the most out of service is usually either a tire or a brake.
True.
So I'm curious to see how that will affect those scores, because so many brakes, once the violation is found, a lot of times they go out of service.
Yeah.
So that's going to kind of make the company's number a little bit skewed.
Yeah.
When it comes to the out of service rates, but I think it's a really, really good change.
Yeah. If you aren't familiar with these changes, I would encourage you to go back and watch that episode of Trucksafe Live. It was a couple of episodes ago where we broke it down item by item. But more importantly than that, if you are a regulated carrier, FMCSA has a preview site up now, a website where you can go in and see how your scores are going to be impacted by these changes. You just log into your SMS account and then you go to that preview website and it will tell you, here's how you're going to be performing once these changes take effect. I encourage you to do that, because if you see something messed up with your scores or something that is concerning to you, that comment period is still open. FMCSA is accepting comments through mid-May, I think. So we're running up pretty close to that comment period. If you see something wrong, go in and submit your comments would be my encouragement to you.
Yeah, I have one account that I'm working with that they're kind of hovering on that borderline right now of alert status. And when they put their information in, The company side actually went down a couple points, and unfortunately, the driver's observe side went up a couple points
above the alert,
and it put it in alert. So, I think that it definitely is going to have an effect.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're right at that threshold in any of the basics, you're the ones I'm most concerned about what these changes are going to do to your score. We've both done that kind of exercise for our clients, and some of our clients, their scores get better and some of them get worse. So it's kind of all over the board. So go in there, check that out, play around, see how it's going to affect you. And if you got questions, I'm always happy to address them. I'm sure Brian is too, if you want to reach out to us. Like I said, watch that prior episode where we really break down how it's going to work. So like Brian said, that leads us right into maintenance. Today's topic, vehicle maintenance, major component of safety and compliance, obviously. And it's one, in my experience at least, that is too often either neglected or completely ignored. And it's occasionally brought to light through things like the upcoming International Road Check, which is coming up May 16th through the 18th, and certain court cases, like one that we are tracking in Florida right now that we're going to spend some time talking about. And what's clear from these things that are always kind of bubbling up to the surface is that when fleet maintenance is not appropriately prioritized, bad things tend to happen. And so,
yes,
and so the purpose of today's show is to kind of shine a light on those maintenance problems, where things tend to go wrong, and helping fleets to kind of improve their processes and procedures in that regard to keep themselves out of the crosshairs here. So before we do that, Brian, for folks who may not be familiar with you, I know we've had you on a couple shows in the past, but maybe give a little background about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. I spent 19 years as a driver. I've been all the way at the bottom and all the way at the top, I think, because I did roll a truck over in 1996. What a horrible experience that was. After that time, I put a little over 2 million miles on safe without even so much a scratch in the paint on anything, which was fantastic. The last 6-7 years I drove, I was with Gordon Trucking out of the Pacific Northwest. They put me in the safety department. Great experience there. Went on to open a school because I was an over-the-road trainer for that time too, and then came in to safety and went to a carrier here in Indiana that I started their training program and built that up, which was fantastic, and then moved to the insurance side of things, which that was a heck of a change. Doing loss control and things like that.
Give us a little sense of how jarring of a change that is, coming from the driver's perspective and the carrier's perspective to the insurance perspective.
When I came into the loss control side, I had always been around big carriers. And when I came into the loss control with Crum and Forster, it was smaller carriers. Usually 25 to 50 was about as max as we were working with. And the differences between structure and setup and resources and, just a whole litany of things was so different. And it's a learning curve to learn, okay, how do we work with them to try to have them be successful as well?
Yeah, it's a complete shift in mindset, right? Because on the carrier side of things, you're always kind of thinking that you're working on issues to help, bring down your insurance premium, reduce your risk,
right?
Essentially. But on the insurance side of things, is you view it more as kind of like a partnership with those carriers. That's what I'm hearing from you, is how can we work with them to get them to that point?
Yeah. And to get them to understand that, whether it's hours of service or it's maintenance or unsafe driving behaviors, things like that, if you can get those things under control, I would never say, hey, your rates are going to go down. That's a dangerous thing to say. But if you can bring in more competition for your business, that's how rates change. So, I learned that real quick and went on to be with DMC Insurance for a while. On the sales side, that was very, very interesting and a huge learning opportunity. And then I ended up here at Reliance, and my time at Reliance has been incredible because they gave us the opportunity to actually start and build a safety program. And Robert and I have done I think a pretty darn good job of building out our resources. And, we visit as many accounts as we can on a quarterly basis.
Going
And
out to the West Coast next week, right?
going to California next week. I've got six or seven accounts that I'm going to go see out there. And
so when you go out and visit a customer, what are you doing generally? What are you spending your time doing?
It's very customized. It's what do they need help with?
Yeah.
Some of it is a focus on, all right, we've got to get our hours of service under control. All right, well, let's look and see what's causing the problems. And most often it's a communication issue.
Yeah.
With the drivers. And, many carriers, especially of the smaller size, how should you say it? It's they don't enforce it as much as they probably should, and then to try to all of a sudden crack down, that gives some heartburn. So
big shock.
So it's trying to get them to do it without just alienating their driver base. And it's a challenge.
Easing them into it can be challenging. Yeah.
And how to take care of their equipment and, getting their guys to do pre-trips and, whatever that case is, that's what we want to help them with.
Yeah.
So it's very customized what we do for our customers.
I think there's something to be said for that. We work with a lot of insurance companies over the years in our capacity as outside counsel for a lot of these large carriers. And it's rare in my experience to see that level of involvement from the insurance broker or carrier in making sure that your program is up to snuff and up to your standards to help you, not only on the insurance premium side of things, but just risk mitigation to begin with. So I'm a big fan of that for sure.
Yeah, and it's a value that we can bring those accounts to, keep them sticky, keep them involved, and give them a service that they're probably not going to get too many other places.
Yeah, for sure. So you and I were talking when you were over at our boot camp last week. You had told me that you had gone through recently a certification process that I thought was pretty cool with respect to performing annual inspections. So you can tell us a little bit about that. And
sure. Robert Cafferly, we work together there at Reliance. We are the loss control side of Reliance Partners, and we both went to Fox Valley Tech in Appleton, Wisconsin, and got qualified to do annual inspections because there's really not a certification process. You can be either qualified through training or through experience to do that. So it's something that we can take to our customers and say, all right, let's review this process as well. So not just safety hours of service, unsafe driving, driver qualification stuff. Now we're looking at the maintenance side of things too, and it's just interesting that all this is starting to flood in at the same time. But making sure that they have everything they need. If that company is doing their own annual inspections, making sure they've got all the correct paperwork, they're looking at the right things, and they're doing the things the way they should.
I think that's what some fleets struggle with, to understand mechanic qualifications. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit more, but I think it fits in here is that, as you said, the regulations aren't very specific in that regard. You would think that as many regulations as we have in that book, that the regulations would require a mechanic to hold certain certifications in order to inspect these large trucks and buses, but it's really not. The regulations are pretty broad. They say by reason of experience, training, or both, you have to be able to identify the parts that are listed out in the appendices and stuff like that, and be able to inspect them. And that's really about it. So we have a lot of clients I know coming to us asking, what do we need to have in terms of mechanic qualifications? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think the regs call for a year of experience or something like that. You want to put somebody in that position that you trust. Yeah. Because they are the ones that are putting the equipment out on the road and telling you as a company, hey, your equipment's good to go. We've checked it over. We've repaired anything that we've needed to repair. And that truck or that trailer is completely safe to operate. Yeah. So it's got to be somebody that's very trustworthy and that you feel comfortable with saying, okay, you're the eyes and ears of that. You deal with it.
What about outside mechanics? Let's say you don't have your own in-house mechanics. We get this question a lot too. We rely on Love's Truck Stops or, whatever. And we rely on their maintenance programs to kind of perform the annual inspections. What do we need to have in terms of documenting those mechanics qualifications, if anything?
Well, you can ask. I mean, you can physically ask, where are there, do you have a qualification form? Or, a qualification form on this mechanic, how many years of experience, you can ask all those questions. And it's probably wise to do so. Does it happen? Probably not very often. And when you're dealing with those types of large companies, they're probably putting the people in place that are the right folks to have there because they've got a lot of exposure too.
Yeah.
But if you're using a garage, a garage down the street, you might want to ask, what qualifications they have. And, it's interesting, Brendan, the two things when you were talking about how broad and really there's not a ton of qualifications needed, the two things in the regs, you've got that and you've actually got the driver qualifications.
Yeah.
Basically, if they're 21 and they can operate the equipment safely.
And speak English.
That's it.
That's it.
So that's weird.
It's crazy the areas where you would expect there to be a lot of regulation, a lot of depth to the regulations. You'd be surprised that there is not. One that always comes to mind besides those two is school buses. School buses are completely exempt from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, which makes absolutely no sense. If there's anybody we want to protect, it's the busfuls of school children. But they are completely exempt from the Federal Motor Carrier when operating between schools and homes. Now, they are subject to a lot of state regulations, is I think the rationale for that. But it's just crazy. If you are a student of the regulations, as I have been in my capacity, it's just crazy some of those things that really stick out like a sore thumb.
Well, you know what it is? They put the minimal regulations on the front end. Yeah. And then the book gets that big on the back end because they've got to make up for everything.
Exactly. Yeah. It's those issues that just never make a whole lot of sense. And it's those types of issues, I think, that lead to a lot of people's frustrations with the regulatory scheme in general. Why are we focusing on these areas when we're completely, seemingly ignoring all of these other areas? But that's a conversation for another day, I suppose. All right. So getting more into maintenance, I wanted to talk first about International Road Check. For those who may not be familiar with it, you want to give us the rundown of what it is and what folks can expect May 16th through the 18th.
Yeah, they put a pretty name on what we used to call the 72-hour blitz. A lot of drivers say, well, that's a good time for a vacation. But what it is they take those 3 days and basically the whole CVSA network, whether it's states, provinces up in Canada, they take that opportunity to focus on a couple points while they're doing their inspection. And it doesn't stop them from inspecting the other stuff. We were talking about it. And last year was lights and logs, and they wrote more brake violations. Yeah. But this year's focus is ABS and cargo securement. And there's quite a few things that I've seen lately that they're really focused on cargo securement in dry vans.
Yeah. So it's, it's always interesting to watch because if nothing else, what we get out of International Road Check is a lot of data from those inspections that are conducted during that 3-day time frame. Mm-hmm. And I pulled up the numbers from last year. Like you said, the focus last year was on lights and logs. But what we saw last year, let's see here, there were over 59,000 vehicle inspections, commercial vehicle inspections conducted during last year's road check. 12,456 of those inspections ended up with the vehicle being placed out of service for a serious violation. That's 21% of all vehicles inspected during road check last year were placed out of service. Almost a quarter of all vehicles, which just blows my mind.
Yeah, that's a big number.
It's a huge number. And like you said, the top violations ended up being brakes, tires, and lights. So even though their focus may be on a couple of issues each year, like you said, that doesn't stop them from doing their full inspections that they would do and placing vehicles out of service for those issues. So it's if you're not going to pay attention to maintenance any other time of the year, this is probably a good time of the year to start paying attention to it.
Yeah, and that was the other, with the out of service, this was the one great thing for drivers that came out of the change in the SMS or the proposed changes is now brake violations don't fall on them, which is only fair. I mean, you don't want your drivers up under there trying to adjust brakes if they don't, the long stroke, short stroke, the measurements and all that. So that is a great thing, but it's still a big number. And, the one thing that I wanted to point out on especially the brakes. If you do an annual inspection and the brakes need adjusted, you just don't adjust them and walk away. There's a reason that they need it adjusted, and it's probably good to look back at the last time that trailer was serviced and see if the adjustment happened there as well.
It could be a symptom of a bigger problem.
Because if you're constantly adjusting brakes on self-adjusting slack adjusters, something's wrong.
Yeah.
So, and I think a lot of times they get adjusted and pushed out the door.
Yeah.
And by the time that the trailer's down the street, they're out of adjustment again.
And then they're just constantly getting violations for that type of thing. So that's that type of situation. What needs to happen? What should be happening at that point to get to the root of the problem?
Obviously, just a deeper look. Yeah, a deeper look into, is it the S-cams are worn? Is it, we can get into all the different parts. Are the slack adjusters bad? Are there teeth missing on the splines? Stuff like that. So it's something's causing that problem.
Yeah. And that's kind of a broader concern, I think, not just specific to brakes, but if we're seeing a quarter of all vehicles being placed out of service for serious violations, and that's not just road check. I think that's close to the national average of just all vehicle inspections throughout the year. A quarter of all commercial vehicles being inspected, being placed out of service, meaning prohibited from operating because they are in such a condition that CVSA has said that they should not be able to be allowed to continue operating. What is the root? What are the root problems that are leading to that, in your view?
It's twofold, and it explains exactly why the SMS is split up like it is. Drivers don't do a good pre-check.
Yeah.
Or a post-trip pre-check.
Pre-check.
Sorry, I'm
going on an airplane.
I'm going on an airplane Monday. They don't do a good pre-trip, and they don't do a good post-trip, or they're not checking their equipment throughout the day.
Yeah.
That's my big soapbox that I get on is, you pull into a fuel island. What stops you from turning your lights on and walking around or thumping tires? Yeah, you don't want to check the tires when they're hot, but to at least bump them, and in the pre-trip you can check them. Because bumping a tire, especially during a pre-trip, that's not going to tell you if it's 50 or 70 pounds, but that's going to make a huge difference on whether it's an out of service or not.
Exactly.
So, I don't think that's happening as much as it should be happening all the time. Boy, I wish I could say it's this reason.
Is it because, in my experience, it could be contributed to a few different things. Lack of accountability for the drivers. The carriers that engage them or employ them are not holding them accountable to performing those types of inspections. In other words, they're just letting it go. Their drivers aren't performing the inspections. There are no consequences for not performing the inspections, or very little, slap on the wrist type thing. So that could be one reason. The other one now escapes me. No accountability. And then also, drivers not understanding how these are impacting the driver specifically on their PSP reports.
Well, the thing about that, the PSP, and I was just about ready to say that when you say no accountability, I wonder if, and maybe you and I have talked about this before, I wonder if the PSP has lost its bite. I wonder, and maybe that's why they're trying to change it up a little bit, but I wonder if, because of recently the issue that we've had trying to get drivers in, and companies trying to hire drivers, that as long as they don't have a bunch of hours of service violations or unsafe, they're letting the maintenance stuff go. And
these drivers look a lot more attractive now. Because we're so many short.
Supposedly. But when you don't have any repercussions to say, wow, we looked at your PSP and you've got all these maintenance violations, or for that fact, even some of the other drivers don't fear the PSP like they did in 2010 when it started. And, I had an app on my phone that would bring up a driver's score, and they would constantly ask me, what's my score? What's my score? I got inspected. What's my score?
You don't get that sense anymore.
No, I don't think that it really means all that much to the drivers anymore, or a lot of them.
Primarily because carriers are not relying on it as heavily as they used to, if at all. It's a voluntary program, and a lot of motor carriers I work with don't even subscribe to it. You got to pay for it. It's a small fee. What are your thoughts on using that as part of the driver qualification process? This is kind of a little off off topic.
Yeah, a little bit off topic, but I think it's still an important thing because it gives you a track record of what that driver's doing. And it obviously in the past 2 years. And if he's got other jobs and he was getting violations at that particular job, what would make you think that he's not going to do that to you as well?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, if you've got great scores and you don't want him to go anywhere, or if you're a borderline, you don't want to be pushed over the edge. And if you're high, you don't need to make a bad situation worse.
Yeah. I found not just with PSP, but minimum, you talked about the fact that the regulations surprisingly say very little about what it takes to be a qualified driver. But what we know is that a lot of motor carriers set their own minimum standards that are oftentimes higher than what the regulatory requirements are. And many times that's driven by insurance. A lot of insurance carriers require that, which makes sense. And I think the fear that a lot of carriers have is locking themselves into whatever standards they end up adopting or whatever PSP points they end up adopting. We get to a point where it starts to cut into our driver capacity or our customer capacity. Is if we're not getting candidates in who meet those standards that we have set, then we're forced with either abandoning the standards or deviating from them here or there, and that can come with its own problems.
Yeah,
obviously.
you start that was something that we talked about at the boot camp was having a policy that you forego because you want to bring this guy in or that guy in or, this driver, that driver. And the next thing you know is everything that you held dear to your heart. Now you're like, we'll let it go for this one.
We're going to let it slide.
Yeah. So that comes at a price, and it always comes at, can you defend that driver in court?
Exactly.
If you can't,
that's the question. If you want to look at risk mitigation as simply as you can, my advice is always be asking yourself, how will this play to a jury? If I go this route that I'm thinking about going, it comes up in driver qualification so much, how is that going to play to a jury? God forbid that driver then gets involved in an accident. And that's a perfect area to ask that question. Let's see, we got a comment here. Michael's asking, are the only two FMCSA certifications required for mechanics for, number one, annual inspections, and number two, brakes? So number one, FMCSA, as we said, does not require a specific certification. So it's not like they're saying you got to go to a certain course and get this certificate to evidence that you meet these qualifications.
Yeah, you don't need to be ASE certified in anything.
But I don't think you're saying that, Mike. I think what you're asking is, are the only two areas where the FMCSA even talks about mechanic qualifications are in those annual inspections and brakes? I think that's true, right?
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
And it's really not certifications. They just have to be qualified.
Right.
So, there's a distinction there that definitely needs to be made.
Yeah, and the regulations dictate various ways that you can meet their qualifications. We've talked about experience or training. I think for the brakes, they get a little more specific. They talk about having been a law enforcement or gone through one of their inspection programs in the past. I think there's a list of
a state or government, or it's just listed as a government, right? Yeah, government sponsored program.
That's right.
That's what we were looking for.
Yeah, those are in Part 396. So yeah, check that out if that's an issue for you. So, all right, so that's International Road Check coming up again, May 16th and 18th. As we said, if maintenance has not been a big focus of yours to this point, number one, it should have been a big focus to you, but now is a great time to make it a focus, particularly in light of these increased inspection activity that we're about to see. Let's see, Troy's saying, with ELD having pre-trip certification, how does the driver verify repairs are completed? With ELD having pre-trip certification, I assume he means the ability to indicate that you have done your pre-trip inspection as kind of a on duty, not driving. Is that what you're?
Typically, I believe on most of the ELD platforms, there's a DVIR process within the ELD as well. So I think that's how they can verify, because it's signed off, or they can take a picture of the repair order or something like that and put it with the DVIR.
Yeah, he says correct. Yeah, he's talking about the electronic DVIR functionality that is being built into more and more ELDs, which I think personally is a great innovation, because DVIRs have historically been a paperwork nightmare.
Yeah.
I mean, it helped that the FMCSA amended its regulations a few years back to eliminate the requirement for DVIRs on days where there is no defect discovered. But for whatever reason, I found that a lot of motor carriers, even if their ELD has the DVIR functionality, are hesitant to move away from the paper DVIRs. Has that been your experience as well?
Well, the only reason they went to the electronic logs, they were forced to. Yeah, I think that anytime you put change out there, people are afraid to change. They don't. It's been working this way for 30 years. Why do we have to change now?
But it's not working.
But it's not working.
That's the problem.
And, we had the electronic DVIRs on the old Qualcomms back in 2008, 2009, something
before
like that.
Before the ELD mandate.
Yeah, before the mandate came down, we were on ELD or AOBRDs.
AOBRDs.
At the time. But we had that functionality in there, and it was something simple that you could either write the defect in, or if it didn't have any defects, just clicked a box that said no defects, and you were done.
It makes it so much easier.
It was a lot easier.
The problem, not even just talking about the ELD functionality, but to your point, Troy, the problem I've found with the DVIR process in general, whether you're on paper or doing it through your ELDs, is just people's lack of understanding or neglect in following that process through. They either don't understand how that process is supposed to work, and so they stop at one point in it, and then they don't go the rest of the way. Because the way that it's supposed to work is, if a driver of a commercial motor vehicle becomes aware at any point throughout the day, whether it be through his own pre-trip inspection, or somebody tells him that there's a problem with his truck, or he's stopped for a roadside inspection by an officer and the officer writes him up for a maintenance-related violation. If he becomes aware of any maintenance-related defect about his vehicle throughout the course of the day that is likely to affect the safety of its operation, then he has to note that on a DVIR. And the idea with the regulations is it doesn't stop there. I see too many carriers stop there. The driver has, well, number one, if you're even to that point, good for you. But sometimes carriers stop there. They have the driver submit the DVIRs, then that DVIR gets lost in a pile somewhere, and never to be seen again. That's not the end of the process. That's the beginning of the process. The driver submits the DVIR. The vehicle is not supposed to be moved again.
That's right. Can't be redispatched until it's fixed.
And what carriers miss is that's considered an acute violation of the regulations. An acute violation to allow a vehicle to drive after a DVIR has been completed or recorded without the issue being fixed first. And so what that means is, if you're involved in an audit, and I've seen this play out several times, if you get audited and the investigator doing your audit finds one of those instances where you had a driver submit a DVIR, but then they have evidence that the driver continued to operate the truck, but there's no evidence that the issue was repaired. And this could be light bulb out. If the DVIR is showing a light bulb out and there's no record of repair, but there is record on his logs that he continued driving, that's an acute violation. And all it takes is one of those to potentially negatively impact your safety rating in an audit. And that could be huge. Yeah,
and it could be. And, I remember there was plenty of times that, well, we'd never write it up on a DVIR. We just fix the light and keep going. But when we talked about that, we're supposed to, turn that stuff in to show that we're maintaining the equipment. As a driver, I never gave that a second thought. I fixed the light and kept going.
Yeah, but to finish out that process, driver submits the DVIR, then we have to put eyes on the DVIR and we have to fix the issue, whether it be the driver himself. We're not saying drivers can't fix the issues. If it's something like that where you got a supply of light bulbs in the truck, fix the issue. But then the next step is you have to certify those repairs on the DVIR, certify that they have been repaired. Whether that's you, the driver, saying, I repaired these, if your carrier lets you do that, or if it's a bigger issue, a mechanic signs off on it, or the carrier itself. And then now you have the paper trail to show that an issue was discovered, the issue was fixed, vehicle wasn't driven until it was fixed, and then the last step of that process is the next driver of that vehicle, whether it's the one that wrote it up or a different driver, co-driver or whatever, has to review the prior day's DVIR and be confident or be sure that if there is an issue noted, that it is certified as repaired. Yeah. That wraps up the process.
Well, and on a bigger scale, it's the same process for an inspection report.
It is.
On maintenance related things. Those inspection reports come in, they have to be signed off.
Exactly.
You have to show proof that you repaired it and get it back to the state.
It is not enough to just say we found a problem. You have to fix the problem.
Right.
That is the main part of this.
And then tell them that you fixed the problem.
Exactly. Because if you don't have that evidence of repair, that is where so many carriers, in my experience, are going wrong in audits. That is where, if there is a maintenance audit, an audit of your maintenance files, maybe you have gotten to that point of being able to identify problems. A lot of carriers don't even get to that point. Their drivers just aren't completing DVIRs, and so we're completely blind to the issues. But if you've gotten to that point, so many carriers are missing that next step, which is having records of repair in the file. If it was your driver fixing the issue on the road, then you should be having your driver submit certification that he fixed the issue, and technically they should have receipts for those light bulbs that go in the file for that maintenance. For the maintenance file.
Michael, you're absolutely right. A PSP does show maybe a falsified driver application that they omitted. If that driver received an inspection, during his time with a previous carrier and didn't put it on his app, then that's a great way to catch that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, where were we? We were talking about road check. Before we run out of time, great discussion so far, but I want to talk about this Florida case that you had posted about on LinkedIn, and that's kind of what got my mind going about having you on to talk about. So this is a case involving Dwayne Haskins Jr. You may have heard about this case in the news. It was big news, last year, early last year. Dwayne Haskins Jr., former quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, was hit and killed in Florida, Broward County, Florida, by a dump truck or a commercial motor vehicle. And that case is now in litigation. So you want to give folks kind of a rundown of the facts of that case?
Yeah, first of all, the fact that this lawsuit was filed on the very last day before tort reform went in, along with roughly 25,000 or number of thousands of cases. So this is going to be a long process, maybe before we see this actually go anywhere, just because the courts down there are completely overbooked. But the actual court case is Mr. Haskins was stopped on the freeway because his rental car ran out of gas, which, by the way, the rental car agency is involved in this too.
Sued as well, yep.
But he was walking on I-575, and part of the facts of the case is he was 3 times over the legal limit at 0.24 with ketamine in his system as well. So he was walking on the freeway, and couple cars swerved to miss. It was 6 a.m. The fact that they say he was dressed in all black, and the dump truck didn't either have enough time or didn't have enough room, or, maybe Mr. Haskins was wandering and he didn't. It's almost like a deer, you don't know which way he's going to go. And he ended up hitting him with the left front of the dump truck. It killed him. In fact, he was struck a second time
by another vehicle,
by another car that was passing by. And so I tell you all that to tell you this, that the lawsuit that was filed is naming the driver, the truck owner, and the shipper as far as defendants in the case. And it's all wrapped around
in addition to about 20 more.
Oh my gosh, the state of Florida, the Florida DOT, the contractor that's supposed to be taking care of that
the
area.
Rental car company. The bar that served.
2 or 3 bars that served him. And then there was supposed to be a couple guys that they're claiming drugged Mr. Haskins as a blackmail type deal. Or I don't know about that part. But so the driver's being named, the truck company owner, and the shipper. And it's all because they didn't take due care on the maintenance side, saying that if the maintenance on this truck was better, then he would have been able to avoid hitting Mr. Haskins. The violations that were found on the truck were found 2 days later during a post-accident inspection by the Florida DOT. And once that stuff came back, then, that gave the attorney some grounds to do it. And
this is a pretty common occurrence, especially with high publicity accidents and fatality accidents, where they will do a post-crash inspection of the vehicle that will a lot of times result in an inspection report that lists violations, not so much in the pedestrian hit cases, but in cases where there's rollovers and vehicle-to-vehicle crashes. A lot of those violations can be attributed to the crash itself, which is always a concern. Like I said, not so much in the pedestrian case.
No, there was, there's pictures of the truck. I honestly don't even think they busted a headlight on this. And, then the truck was also overweight by 700 pounds. So, there's a lot that's going into this on why he didn't stop or why he didn't swerve. And, I have my own feelings on that piece of it, but looking at the company's maintenance stuff, they do have some issues in that category. So, I think this is going to be something where ultimately they named everybody to see where it can go. Yeah, what sticks.
And that's what you need to understand if you are a regulated carrier, is that it doesn't matter if those things actually bear out, if the evidence actually bears out that it was a brake problem or a tire problem that actually contributed to the accident. It doesn't matter. What matters is you are going to get pulled into this lawsuit, and those things are going to be alleged. And if those things are alleged, maintenance related problems, the next question is going to be, what's your maintenance program look like? That is going to be a focus of the litigation at that point, because those things are alleged. And so we're going to be looking, the plaintiff's attorney is going to be digging into your maintenance program, your CSA scores, your vehicle out of service rates. And if they paint a bad picture, that picture is going to be painted to the jury in that case. And that very well could screw you, even if the circumstances of the accident at hand may not have been different, whether your vehicle had maintenance problems or not. The case becomes less about the accident at hand and more about your reputation, the problems that you have with your maintenance program. That is what we know about this reptile theory of litigation that we're always talking about. That's what we know is a significant contributor to the nuclear verdicts that we're seeing. If we just look at, we've talked about this, Brian, but that ATRI report on the nuclear verdicts, I know we all are kind of putting that out there because it's important for carriers to understand that, that study looked at dozens of multi-million-dollar case jury verdicts awarded against trucking companies over the last decade or so. And one of the most interesting things about the study, number one, those cases are on the rise. I mean, skyrocketing. Yeah. I think, if I'm getting this correctly, I think in 2004 there were maybe 2 cases where a verdict had exceeded $1 million against a trucking company, and then in 2018 there were like over 100 or something like that. Yeah. And the average jury verdict size has gone from below $1 million to like $22.3 million. That is the average verdict size in cases involving trucking companies, highway accident cases. What I wanted to say, though, is one of the most interesting things I found out of that study was one table in that study listed some of the common contributors to these types of cases. And it showed what percentage of the cases that involved those particular issues resulted in a verdict in favor of the plaintiff. So in other words, there was a list of about 10 of them. Hours of service was at the top. There were some driver qualification issues. There were also maintenance issues on that chart. And what was stunning in that chart is that when those regulatory violation type issues were an issue in the case, north of 85% of all of those cases resulted in a plaintiff's verdict.
Yeah, I think the lowest number on there was 87 or 89.
Some of them were 100%.
Yeah, they were 100% out of 20. The hours of service one sticks in there. It was 26 cases, and 100% of the time
where there was an hours of service violation.
Well, and not only
even a violation.
Yeah, just problems with hours of service within the company, because they can paint the picture as you don't care about their hours of service. Exactly. And now they're moving it towards the vehicle maintenance. We've seen unsafe driving. We've seen, where they brought in the driver qualification, but all that stuff you said about the DVIR and the maintenance records and things like that, they start bringing that stuff in. Now it's a whole nother can of worms.
That becomes the focus of the case. And that's what influences the jury because if they hear all of this evidence about how bad you are performing from a CSA score perspective or out of service rates, that's what's going to stick in their mind. This is a bad company. I need to do something to punish that company because of it, regardless of the circumstances of this particular accident, which should be my focus. And so absent tort reform, like we're seeing in Florida and stuff like that, that's how these cases play out. And that's why it's important that you understand these things. It's not because this particular dump truck maybe had some brake issues. That's the least of my concerns. My major concern is now that that's brought up in the case, now we look at your CSA scores and we see you have shitty maintenance scores. That is going to be the picture that is shown to the jury.
Yeah, and you know, we're seeing more and more drivers get drug into these things. You know, it used to be drivers were kind of insulated by the company, but now they're getting named in these lawsuits because he didn't do. They're just basically saying he didn't do pre-trip inspections. He didn't take due care. Yeah. And I mean, there's the A through K here of all these things that he failed to do as a driver. And, you know, that it's getting dangerous for him.
Yeah. And keep in mind, obviously, plaintiff's bar is always looking for the deep pockets.
Yep.
And, you know, I get it when you're dealing with a serious accident where there are significant injuries or a death. I want to be clear. We need to make that family or that person whole the best that we can do through monetary damages. We need to get them the money that they deserve if the problems that we caused are attributable to us and our driver.
Right.
I'm not saying that that's a problem. What I'm saying is a problem when we take it the next step and we start to see these multi-million-dollar verdicts that are intended not to compensate the family, but to punish the motor carrier for them having bad safety scores. That is where we are seeing these uptick in nuclear verdicts. That $1 billion case that we saw in Florida last year, $100 million of those were intended to compensate the family of the victim, but $900 million of that award was intended to punish the two motor carriers that were involved in that wreck.
Which neither one of them, I think they were single operator.
They were small.
Yeah, they were small. So, you know, the $1 million of coverage is all they had.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, it's funny money, and it makes,
nobody's getting $1 billion.
It makes headlines and stuff like that. And, you know, for these small carriers, shoot, a $500,000 verdict.
Yeah.
That could be, that could be it for them. So,
but the point, or I think the tactic of the plaintiff's bar is, we understand we're not getting $1 billion, but what we are doing at the same time is desensitizing the public to these huge awards so that the next case, well, there's been $1 billion case in the past. So what's $1 billion? Let's do $2 billion.
Yeah.
You know, at some point it becomes, you're desensitized to it.
Or the thing that the next thing that they want to point out. I mean, I don't want to put anything out there because I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but you know, what's next? Okay. Now we've gone after their maintenance. We went after the drivers. Now we've gone after the equipment. What's next? You go after the weather. I mean, it's insane.
Again, not saying that. All we are saying is that, in our view, the focus of the case should be the case itself. It should not be the carrier's reputation, except to the extent that the reputation contributed to the accident. That is how our judicial system is built. It is about a case between two people. It is not putting the motor carrier's safety-related reputation on trial, which is what we are doing in these cases nowadays. So that's where kind of tort reform comes into play. And if you missed our last show, we had Alex Miller, CEO of Florida Trucking Association, on the show talking about how Florida just recently passed tort reform, which is, like you said, they passed it at the end of March. And I think right up...
The 24th is when it went into effect. And... was it the last couple days?
The last couple days.
It was like 25,000. It was just a huge number of cases. And I think we just read before we came on, the court docket is now 1,300 cases per judge.
It's something ridiculous.
Now, the only reason that this may go higher is because of the high profile person that was involved. But, you know, this could be tied up. But this also gives everybody out there a great chance to say, All right, we got to dial our maintenance in.
Exactly. And regardless of whether this case proceeds to trial, if I had to guess, I would say it probably doesn't. This is going to get settled. Yeah. The facts are just not great on the other side of things. But the point is, if you're pulled into one of these cases, you've already lost the battle, because now you're faced with a settlement, a potential multi-million-dollar settlement to get yourself out of this case, particularly when the facts are as they are here, where the motor carrier's scores are just not great.
And they don't have a great record of, well, and the other piece was they were saying the driver was going too fast, and guess what? That basic's in alert too.
And overloaded, which doesn't help the story that he wasn't able to stop. So it's just those little things start to add up. And then when you start looking at them, with the bigger picture of how is this carrier performing, it just paints a really bad picture. So I think that's what we wanted to convey, which is, seeing the forest or missing the forest for the trees here. Don't get so caught up in the fact that, you have relatively few brake problems or whatever in a particular accident. If the bigger story is, we've got an out of service rate that exceeds the national average, or we've got a vehicle maintenance CSA score that is in alert status, that is the story that's going to be told. And that's what's going to stick with the jury. And that is what is going to screw you over in those types of cases.
That's a fact.
So that is it. We, believe it or not, are out of time.
That was it?
That was it.
Oh,
it is 4 o'clock.
I figured we were going to go for another couple hours.
We could.
Actually, we probably will. But just nobody else will see it.
Nobody won't be live. So we'll do maybe an after session. We should start doing that with Brian. But anyway, hey, just want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Really appreciate you tuning in to these episodes. Be sure to stay tuned for the next one. We're going to try and do a couple of these per month. Best way to keep in touch with us is through our newsletter. You can subscribe to our newsletter over at trucksafe.com. We will alert you to upcoming episodes. You can also find them on trucksafelive.com, where we post all of our show information. Follow us on social media pages. We are constantly posting DOT related content on there. Thanks again to Log Rock for sponsoring this season of Trucksafe Live. Appreciate you teaming up with us to do that. That's it. Anything else to add?
No, man, I think we're good.
All right. See you guys. Thanks for watching.
See ya.